For my scholarly practitioner report, I attended the CPED conference virtually. This happened on October 19th, and it began at 11:45 and officially ended at around 5:30 p.m. After the 5:30 p.m. session, there was an opportunity for members and attendees to communicate with each other through GatherTown, which was an online platform where the presenters could share their one-page resources from their presentations, and you could chat and video conference with any of the other members as well as the CPED members. To the left, you will see an informational poster. This is an example from one of the presenters. In GatherTown, you could move your character and move into one of the rooms and view every single presenter's informational poster. You can also download and then personally send them messages, ask questions, and get more insight about their presentations. It was a very unique experience. Summary of presentations. Session 1 is the session that I fully attended. It was a full 1-hour session. Each presenter was presented 6 minutes to summarize their research. Then, following their presentations, there was a 30-minute question and answer session where all the attendees could ask each of the presenters or one of the presenters specific questions about their research. The first presenter of session 1 was Annabelle, and her study was a phenomenological study that described the experiences of deferred action for childhood arrivals, which she also said DACA, and undocumented students as they navigate college enrollment. One of the questions asked after her presentation was, how was she able to determine the best method for her research? When she had started, she considered doing a case study with participants. However, when she began to meet with the participants, she realized how vulnerable they were, and some were not ready to speak with her, especially since there was such a political environment, which made it detrimental. So they didn't want the narrative to be politicized. And she also was trying very carefully to make sure that she decided to center on phenomenology instead. She was very mindful that the information would be safe and that she wanted all of the participants' voices to be heard. Her key findings were related to education experiences, the senior year of high school for participants, and navigating college enrollment. Granted, her focus was primarily on high school students who were preparing for higher education. She knew that her research could be applied to one's own cultural wealth, even in settings that are typically not set up for them. So from her key findings, when dealing with education experiences, primarily early public education, she learned from her participants that they understood that there were different rules when they needed to navigate society, and most of the participants realized early on in their educational journey that they typically were alone. During their senior year in high school, many of the participants realized that there were real consequences regarding their immigration statuses, and then many realized that their status would also have some implications when they considered post-secondary options. And all of her 9 participants definitely relied on community colleges as opportunities to leverage their community, cultural, and wealth. This information was also presented in her one-page informational poster. The second presenter in session 2 was Cecile. Her topic was called Visible but Often Ignored, a mixed method study exploring blight and litter in rural America. Her study was a mixed method study. She had noticed a gap and she wanted to know if it was real. Her study focused more on what was going on in a community versus what was just going on in an educational setting. Her key findings were related to litter analysis, correlations, lack of correlations, the definition of the term blight, and lack of community engagement. Her mixed methods involved quantitative methods and qualitative methods, especially in data collection. She used a Likert scale for her surveys to analyze what was the existing understanding of litter and blight in these communities, and it observed her areas as she worked in some of those areas. Her qualitative data collection included interviews of randomly selected participants, and many admitted that they didn't even understand the term blight and what that meant. And when it came to discussing litter, it was quite uncomfortable, and many of the participants were less likely to go to an area with a higher increased amount of litter. As for her results, she realized that litter was one of the factors that did infect blight, and there was some type of link. And she goes into more depth on her informational poster, on the analysis, and all of her other findings. Many of the implications that were found in Cecile's research was that there was need for the community to provide opportunities for those who lived in the community to think and work together and have a sense of community rather than just a sense of independability when it relates to litter and blight. There were no common understanding of the terms, and so there needed to be some local understanding from all participants. The third presenter was Denise, and her research was about coaching elementary educators culturally sustaining teaching. And this was from a problem within her own school. Her methodology, she used improvement science and qualitative data. At the end of her research, she focused mostly on her conclusions and takeaways. She was very passionate as she spoke about her role as a researcher and instructional coach within her school, the importance of classroom talk as she went through 3 phases of her research and tested them out with teachers within her own school, and how she found that professional development was crucial, especially in teacher development, and that trust was also something that needed to be examined. In her presentation, Denise presented her informational graphic, which seemed quite easy for me to follow as I was somewhat connected to her own experience. With her problem statement, she admitted that it was very near and dear to her, which really showed her passion and the reason for wanting to solve a problem that she had seen in her own school. Denise was very specific about her use of data collection. She used interviews, observations, video records, reflective journals, and she chose 3 specific teachers from her school due to their culturally diverse students. She was able to work on alternative discourse and even focus on their voices being heard, not just for culturally improving experiences for students, but also allowing teachers to learn. She described 3 phases, her phase 1 being establishing the discourse, helping teachers understand what it looks like, and then analyzing who's speaking more, are there open and closed questions in the lessons and happening throughout the classroom experience. Her phase 2, she analyzed and reviewed data with a lot of her materials, using her coaching materials and data, and used cross-analysis for her themes. In doing so, she was able to see that there were prominences, and she also realized that there were many closed questions to engage in the work, and she needed to enhance the classroom discourse. She found that many of the teachers, especially those that she had chosen, could engage in a way that was sustainable. And even the teachers felt that there was a method that they could incorporate. And in her third phase, she performed a crosswalk analysis. Following her presentation, she was pleased and proud to know and to inform us that her teachers felt that they had learned something and that they were grateful for her involvement in this process. She knew that there was implications in the future for other schools and school leaders, so that professional development was ongoing for teachers. On this page, you will see the 3 presentations or 1-pagers from the presenters. You can click on each of the images and it will send you to a PDF link to view if you are interested. Scholarly takeaways. My first scholarly takeaway was in the idea of organization. All presentations demonstrated that no matter the methodology chosen for the research, it was important to have a sense of organization. It was important to understand your method and your framework in order to organize your information and present it to an audience. It was also important to understand how you are representing this information, whether it's allowing for voices to be heard or the continuation of research about a problem in order to create a solution, or simply just to inform your audience and figure out the implications for your research. You can also see from their one-pagers how they organize their thought process. They were able to use these one-pagers and their organization in order to summarize their entire research all within 6 minutes of their presentations. My second takeaway was how these presenters were concise. It was clear that each presenter understood who their audiences were for each of their dissertations. As they provided their brief summaries of their research, they knew that they were presenting to other students and potentially EDD students and CPED members. And so they understood what it is that they needed to share. They knew what was most important for their audience, and they knew they needed to focus on their methodology, their framework, their findings, their purpose, and any implications that they have. And third was their passion. Their passion drove their work. So despite your methodology, it is important to understand what it is that you are researching. It is important to understand that literature is there for us to become experts in our topics or ideas. But it's also important to understand what needs to be or should be researched. Especially in a dissertation when we need to continue literature, seek what needs to be researched further, and these presenters did that very thing. And it was interesting to see how their presentations were both similar and different. There was one presentation that was purely focused on education, one presentation that was focused on the community, and one presentation that was related to education, but also the community as well. Course content connections. In Cecile's presentation, she used mixed methods design. So for chapter 16, which starts on page 544, this was immediately a connection that I made to the text. The advanced data collection on page 563 really reminded me about Cecile's work. She focused on her quantitative data collection pieces and her qualitative pieces. You can also see in the visual here where you can pause and watch. Where you can pause and read for yourself the data pieces that were quantitative in her research and pieces that were qualitative. Her quantitative, she used a Likert scale survey about existing litter and blight, and she included her observations amongst the community. For her qualitative pieces, she included interviews with a random sample, and then she used a semi-structured interview when speaking with public leaders in the community, and then also some interviews with volunteers. This relates to page 563, the advanced data collection, where Cecile used both quantitative and qualitative methods. On page 563, it mentions that you collect both quantitative and qualitative data at the same time. Then you collect quantitative data first, followed by your qualitative data. You can then collect qualitative data first or followed by quantitative data. And you collect both quantitative and qualitative at the same time, and you also collect it in a sequence. For my second course content connection, I chose Denise's research as she used qualitative methods. First, On page 64 in the text, it talks about the 5 aspects to a statement problem. To the right, you will notice Denise's statement problem, and I feel that she did adhere to the guidelines that were presented in the text. On page 64, it mentions the statement of problem has 5 aspects. 1, the topic. 2, the research problem. 3, a justification of the importance of the problem as found in the past research and in practice. 4, the deficiencies in our existing knowledge about the problem. And 5, the audiences that will benefit from a study of the problem. She definitely justified based on how the problem statement was very near and dear to her within her own school, and that she wanted to analyze the practices and have implications for the teachers and faculty of her school. On page 131 to 132, it discusses the guidelines for qualitative research questions. You can pause this video to read Denise's research questions in the image to the right. In her questions, you will see that she began both with the word how. On page 132, it mentions that when you begin with the word how or what rather than why, so that way you do not suggest a probable cause and effect relationship. Instead, you suggest exploration in qualitative research. She is also specifying the central phenomenon she plans to explore in both of her questions. And she's identifying her participants in the study and mentioning the research site for the study. In her presentation, she mentioned, I chose 3 teachers in my school due to their culturally diverse students. This immediately had me connecting to the text when we discussed purposeful sampling on page 206. Page 206 is titled, What are the different purposeful sampling approaches for selecting participants and the sites? Under purposeful sampling, the researchers intentionally select individuals and sites to learn or understand the central phenomenon, which is what Denise did. Application to school context. I focus mostly on Denise's presentation as I found it most applicable to my school, in the sense of teacher development, professional development, being able to identify the problems and explore solutions in your schools, and being intentional in what you do. To the right, you will see her conclusion. Her conclusions were focused on her reflections as a role as an instructional coach and leader and scholarly practitioner, which I feel that I am in the same boat. I am not an instructional coach. However, I am a team leader in my school and have been, and a scholarly practitioner at the same time. I feel that it is important that I do reflect on my role in how I can help promote teacher development, and I can seek professional development opportunities to help identify any problems and explore solutions that my teachers would need. Another conclusion she found was the importance of classroom talk, which is always something that a teacher can improve on and encourage students to have more active engagement and higher discourse. Denise also says explaining teachers' development of CST and the implications of professional development, which all can be applied to my school setting presently. My scholarly practitioner reflection. This experience has really shaped my identity as an emerging scholarly practitioner. During the CPED conference, I was able to directly ask questions to some of the presenters. Here you will see my question wasn't my question, it was another student's question to Jill Perry, who was a CPED member, and they asked her what an EDD dissertation should be. She stated, it is your argument for addressing an issue based in literature and research, but presented in ways that help others understand and that creates change in practice. Which, as a scholarly practitioner, I am learning that my research should be an extension of literature and seeks to find more research to add to the literature. But I really liked the way that she stated that it also includes addressing an argument or my argument for addressing an issue. This really gives me more of an understanding as to what my dissertation could be. Not only that, but also seeing the presenters and their experiences that they shared in the process of creating their dissertations and going through their research. And now almost all of them have graduated, have already defended their stances or are about to graduate is very eye-opening and very promising. They were also very inspirational. I attended the third session and I was able to personally speak with presenter Blair, and I asked what advice would she give to new EDD students. Her response was that she would try not to do it all. She said you would get overwhelmed by all of the possibilities and avenues that you can go with your research. It is important to keep it narrow, but take notes on your passions. You can always revisit some after you've graduated. So this is something that really resonated as a new EDD student, and in a cohort of just eight students. It is important to always remember that we can't do everything. When it comes to research, there are so many venues that we can go, so many different types of methods. And I feel like as a scholarly practitioner, that's something that I can learn and grow in understanding how to keep my ideas how to narrow down my ideas and where I need to go from there. And I do like how they point out that it's important to take note of what you're passionate about, because overall, I saw from this experience that passion drove every single one of those presenters in selecting their problems or issues that they wanted to explore. And it was that passion that drove them to do the research and to do the work for their dissertations and to come up with solutions or to share voices or to extend the research based on the methods that they chose, which is what I hope to accomplish as a scholarly practitioner.